بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we continue with our study of the text Mathara al-Qulub of Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud al-Yaqubi rahimahullah ta'ala. And now we move on to the next section within this poem. In the previous section we were talking about the universal cure of dhikr, and we talked about dhikr in general, the Quran as a form of dhikr, as well as the three components of the daily and evening wird. And we're now moving on to the next section after covering tafakkur, reflection as another universal cure. This section is about Khwatir. And the term Khwatir is often translated as passing thoughts. But as we'll see, not every Khwatir is a passing thought that simply comes and goes. Sometimes the Khwatir can be a suggestion coming from an outside source. Sometimes it can be a suggestion that is repeated over and over again from an internal source. And there's different types. So we need to learn about these types and what the differences are between them. So speaking about Khwatir, we have to ask, what do these things have to do with purification of the heart? What does it matter how many types of passing thoughts or suggestions there are? How does that affect the heart? And the answer is, as Al-Imam Ibn Zukri stated, thoughts engender desires. And those desires generate intentions. Those intentions generate determinations, decisions. And those decisions, when they are acted upon repeatedly, they become habits. So we're often fighting bad habits, trying to remove bad habits and inculcate good habits. Knowing the types of thoughts and suggestions that come to our hearts helps us to get to the bottom of this business of purifying the heart in developing a very important quality, the quality of discernment, of tamyiz. Learning about the suggestions and thoughts that come to our mind and their types and rulings assists us in having the quality of tamyiz, of discernment. Discerning what is from our egos, our lower self, what is from a higher source, what is from a lower source, and how to respond accordingly. The greatest gift one can get from understanding this section is the gift of discernment. And without this discernment, we may receive all sorts of passing thoughts and assume they're all our own. But here the Shaykh tells us that they're not all our own. In fact, there's 4 different types, and each one should be dealt with in a different way. How can we develop that quality of discernment after learning these different types? There are certain things, the ulama state, which help or hinder our discernment. They say, for example, taqwa or the lack of taqwa will affect our discernment, because Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran, in tattaqullaha yaj'al lakum furqana. If you have taqwa of Allah, Allah will give you a furqan. The furqan is the criteria. It is that inner strength, that ability to discern between what is good and better and best, and bad and worse and worst. That ability to discern is obtained through taqwa, and it's diminished through failures to have taqwa when it counts. Likewise, our discernment is affected by our mizaj, our temperament, just the way we are. Some people are more introverted and slower to act. Some people are by their very nature more cautious, They deliberate and think things through before they do something, whereas others can be a little more fiery or airy. The four temperaments in the Islamic tradition, you have the sanguine and the choleric, you have the melancholic and the phlegmatic. Two of these are associated with fire and air, respectively, so they're a little more quick to decide to do things without the same level of deliberation and thought as someone who's associated with water or earth. So there's not much we can do about that. Certain things enhance our own natural mizaj or diminish it, food, climate, and so on. But we have to be aware of those things, because if we have that temperament that is quick to decide something and carry it out without proper deliberation, we're going to struggle here. And if we are of a temperament that it takes things slowly and deliberates, we'll find it a bit easier. But as you'll see, because one thing may come easy to you, it doesn't mean that everything comes easy to you. And just because one thing may come hard to you, doesn't mean that other things are going to be as hard. Likewise, health affects our discernment, in so much as illness and conditions may lead to emotional imbalances or affect our perception of things external to us, or they affect how we receive things coming into us. You know, an example of this would be even not sickness per se, but just the way certain foods and drinks affect us. If you drink a really strong cup of coffee and that caffeine hits you and you're feeling that rush, you may feel inspired to do something because of the energy. It would be a mistake to think that this is of an angelic source inspiring you to do something. It's the caffeine. And this is not coming from me. This is coming from our Islamic tradition, because we have some of the ulama who wrote about this. In fact, one Andalusian scholar has a whole essay about this called the Risala on Ma la yu'awwal alayh, what cannot be relied upon. And this is a very heavy-hitting essay, because he kind of peels the layers and says, any change to your spiritual state that comes about through a change in your temperament or from an external source cannot be relied upon as a sign of spiritual progress. You may drink a strong cup of coffee and you have an inrush of energy and you decide to make dhikr and you're really feeling into the dhikr. That's from the caffeine. That's not because of an angelic inspiration to do dhikr necessarily. So you can't rely on that on its own, and so on. Likewise, eating halal and haram will affect our discernment. Imam al-Qushayri, he says in his Risala that the sheikhs here meaning the masters who spoke about these spiritual matters, the mashayikh, are unanimous in agreement that one whose food consists of the unlawful will be unable to discern between inspiration and waswasa from shaitan. If a person mixes their food with a haram, it will dampen and dull the spiritual sensitivity, and they will not have the discernment to distinguish between what is of an angelic source and what is of a satanic source. Some of the ulama have said that it is obligatory upon us to know these different types of Khwatir and their details. And they say it's obligatory because these things lie at the root of our actions. They are the roots and they are the source and catalyst that inspire us to do something. And it is only by knowing these Khwatir that we can develop true sincerity and know that what we are doing is proper and sincere. We're discerning whether something is for the sake of Allah or not. So, reading into the poem now, the Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud, he says, moving on, because this is the next section, since thoughts are the wellspring of actions, the source, it should be known that while some enjoin good outwardly, when one reflects deeply, he will realize that they often desire what is false. Here, Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud is saying something that may surprise many people. Certain thoughts will enjoin what is good, but when you look deeper into your heart, you may find that that suggestion to do good is generated from a corrupt desire. Hence the importance of discernment and knowledge. Thoughts that enjoin good, that suggest to do something good, might be shaitani. They might be shaitani thoughts in disguise, because shaitan likes to plot and plan, and he may suggest something that is outwardly good, but it is a trick, it is a trap to ensnare you in a long-term plan he's hatched for you that will lead you to something evil. So that's a good thing in itself, but he is leading you along a certain route that will take you to something evil. So he will suggest something good. So here you see the importance of discernment. The same thing applies to the nafs, the ego, the lower self, the appetites and the lower impulses may also suggest certain things to us that are on the surface good, but it is a trick, it is a trap, it is a stratagem to take us along a certain route that will lead us to something evil. Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud says, if one is experienced in differentiating the two types and is masterful in weighing them upon the scales of the Sharia, he can discern when it is from the stratagems of shaitan, a way of using fives to get to sixes. So the mashayikh, they say that unfortunately most human beings do not concern themselves with discerning between these different types of thoughts. Most human beings assume that their thoughts are their own every single time. So in order to discern the different types of thoughts and suggestions that come to us, we need knowledge and we need experience. And we say we need knowledge and experience because without knowledge, you cannot weigh those thoughts upon the trustworthy scale of the Sharia of the Prophet ﷺ. So it cannot be this scale or that scale. What's the current trends? What's in style? It cannot be the scale of what we feel. It has to be the scale of the Sharia. So that requires knowledge. And it requires experience and discernment. So when he's saying, what he says here is that shaitan is our avowed enemy. And under the guise of goodness, he will sometimes lay traps to destroy people. He has specific traps that he sets to destroy ulama, traps to destroy scholars, ascetics, worshippers, traps to destroy the rich, traps to destroy the poor, traps to destroy anyone and everyone, no matter what role they play in society. So the reason why the mashayikh mentioned this is because shaitan typically does not call to overt disobedience for the believer. He doesn't come to the believer and tell him straight away, go kill someone or go do this or that. Something very clearly, overtly disobedient. Because he knows the believer will reject that right out of the gate. So instead, he suggests things in a step-by-step manner through these passing thoughts. Shaykh Muhammad Mawlud goes on to say, war is deception. And the whole 5 or 6s thing I should address because people wonder what this is. In Arabic, what he says here, a way of using 5 to get to 6s, he's speaking about shaitan here because this is a saying of the Arabs. They say that so-and-so used 5 to get 6s when they tried to scheme and fool someone. So what this means is a description of shaitan, saying that the stratagems of shaitan, the tricks of shaitan, are a way of using 5s to get 6s. So it's a figure of speech about his tricks and stratagems. So he says that war is deception, and your worst enemy is your own nafs, your own lower self, that is always making your disease appear pleasant. The one in authority is commanded to always ascertain the reality of the situation and to measure the thought against the standard of the sacred law, the Sharia. This line of poetry begins by saying, Al-Harbu khid'a. This is taken from a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he says that war is deception. Imam al-Ghazali says that when a person's heart is overcome with thoughts of the dunya, Shaitan comes and whispers suggestions of evil. But when that person resorts to dhikr, Shaitan departs. And in place of Shaitan, the angels arrive with suggestions of goodness, inspiring him with good. And if the person resorts to thinking about things of dunya, Shaitan comes back. If he averts that through dhikr, the angelic inspirations come. And there's this constant back and forth. We think of these cartoons we grow up with. You have the devil on the left shoulder and the little angel on the right shoulder. And that's not literal, but it's like that in a way, because it's a ma'araka, as the ulama say, a battle. And so the shaitan comes and whispers, he or his minions. The angels come and suggest things, and there's a back and forth. Which one are you going to respond to? So it is a battle in that way. Nevertheless, you have in this culture the saying, the devil made him do it. If someone did something bad, someone may say, the devil made him do it, or the devil made me do it. And we know from the Quran that the devil cannot force anyone to do anything. He has no authority, no sultan over those who believe. We are responsible for what we do. If we respond to the suggestions of shaitan, we have responded, we were not forced. The shaitan cannot make us do anything. And that is why the Shaykh says here that your worst enemy, he doesn't say it's shaitan, he says your worst enemy is your own nafs that is always making your disease appear pleasant. And sometimes it's not clear where the suggestion is coming from. Is it the ego or is it shaitan? In the 3rd chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Imran, Allah mentions in the beginning, زُيَّلَ لِلنَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ. He says that certain desires and pleasurable things have been adorned and beautified for people. زُيِّنَ, made to appear beautiful and alluring. And this is in the passive form in Arabic. It doesn't mention that so-and-so has made this beautiful to another person. It says, zuyyina, it has been made. And the ulama of tafsir from the earliest days have said that it refers either to the nafs or to the shaitan. That your own nafs can make these things beautiful to you, can adorn them and make them seem pleasing. It could also be the shaitan doing it. So ultimately, we are responsible regardless of who is suggesting what. He says here, the one in authority is commanded to always ascertain the reality of the situation and to measure the thought against the standard of the sacred law. So whatever comes to our mind, we have to measure it according to the standard of the sacred law, the sharia. And in connection with this meaning, the ulama mentioned the verse in Surah Al-Hujarat, where Allah Ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, in ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyanu. O you who have believed, if a corrupt individual comes to you with news, you must verify it. Al-Imam As-Suhrawardi mentions in Awarif al-Ma'arif that the apparent meaning of this verse and the occasion of its revelation is these things are very clear because there is a specific circumstance that was in connection with this verse, literally verifying the news of someone who has the quality of fisq, of sinfulness. So that's clear. However, it's also a notice from Allah Ta'ala to His servants that they must ascertain and verify matters within themselves. Sahal ibn Abdullah at-Tustari said about this verse, the fasiq is a liar, and lying is a quality of the lower self, because it goads and encourages and suggests things that are contrary to reality. Therefore, it is necessary to ascertain and verify when it suggests something. They use this verse and apply it to the nafs. They say, so if your nafs suggests something to you, this is the way something is and you should act accordingly, you have to weigh that according to the scale of the sharia. You have to ascertain that. You can't just latch onto it and believe it without discerning, right? He says, and to know the difference between friend and foe, because ignorance of this leads to destruction. You have to know how to discern between the evil suggestion and the good suggestion that comes into your heart. You have to train yourself to be a person of deliberation, and you have to remove impulsiveness from your decision making. This comes easier for some people than for others. He says that the shaitan's entrances to the heart are many. So shaitan suggests things through different avenues. He has different ways of approach. He says shaitan's entrances to the heart are many, whereas the angels have only one gateway, one entrance. So veiling is feared. So these doors or gateways of shaitan are many, through the senses, through the eyes, the ears, and so on. But the angels only have one gateway, and that is the basira, the spiritual insight of the servant that can receive those suggestions and understand them. Imam al-Ghazali, he clarifies what this means. In his Ihya, he gives this analogy. He says, imagine there's a traveler in a remote desert area in the middle of nowhere. He's trying to get somewhere, and in this remote area, in the middle of nowhere, there are multiple paths, each one going in a different direction. And he has to decide which one he's going to take. If he has to go on one road among these many roads. If he takes any other road, he's going to miss the mark and go astray. He won't get to his destination. There's only one problem. Well, there's actually more than one problem. The other problem is that it's pitch black dark outside. Not only are there many paths, he can't see them either. But he knows there's multiple paths, and he has to decide which path is the correct path to take to get to my destination, and how do I find it? What does he need in this case? How will he know that he's taken the right path? He will only know when he sees with the spiritual eye when the sun rises. Using this analogy of being outside at night, he has to wait until the sunrise, right? And when the sun rises, he can see where he's supposed to go. He'll know the right path. So he has to have this basira to discern which is the right road and to be able to see where it's at. So the shaitan's entrances are many, but the angel's entrance is one, which is the basira, the spiritual insight. Which is why if the person does not exercise taqwa, if they consume the haram, if they do not exercise discernment, they will not be able to distinguish between what is angelic from what is shaitanic. So, we've mentioned so far two types of passing thoughts: shaitanic and nafsanic, satanic and selfish. But there's two others. Imam Muhammad Mawlud says that the masters of this science have clarified the different types of thoughts. I endeavor to summarize them in one line by saying they are four: lordly, Rabbani; selfish, nafsani; malaki or angelic; and shaitani, satanic. These are the four: lordly, selfish, angelic, and satanic. Everything that he said before this has been explaining what Khwatir are and how important it is to understand them and discern one from the other. Now he talks about the different types and other ways we can discern which one is which. So the ulama mentioned that of these four, each of them is a counterpart to another. The angelic suggestion is a counterpart to the lordly suggestion. The nafsi, selfish suggestion is a counterpart to the shaitani suggestion, but there are differences. Imam al-Qushayri talks about this in his Risala. He says that Khwatir, these suggestions and passing thoughts, are discourses that appear to one's consciousness. It may be from the casting of an angel, ilqa, casting of an angel, or a devil, or hadithun nafs, internal discourse. You talk to yourself in your mind. This discourse you have in your mind would be hadithun nafs. internal self-talk, or from the real, al-haq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, if it is angelic, it is called inspiration. If it is from the nafs, it is called hawajis, which is basically selfish self-talk. If it is from the shaitan, it is called waswasa, whispering. And if it is from Allah and cast in the heart, it is called khatiru haq, a suggestion coming from Allah. So we are aware of waswasa. Waswasa is basically shaitanic Khwatir, suggestions and thoughts being cast into us. What are the differences between these? We're going to learn. Imam Muhammad Mawlud, after mentioning the 4 types, goes on to speak about how each is different from the other. He says, the first two, which are the first two? The first two is the Khatir, that is Rabbani, and the second one is Nafsani. So these are not counterparts to each other, but he mentions them as the first two. The lordly suggestion and the selfish suggestion. He says the first two are distinguished by being steadfast in their inrushing, coming in, and the last two, the angelic and the satanic, are constantly wavering. This is a very important distinction. So the ulama say that the lordly Rabbani suggestion comes with force because it is based on a solid foundation, and the selfish one comes with force because it's your ego. It's like a baby who wants to be fed. It's not going to give up. The shaitani, devilish suggestion and the angelic one are constantly wavering, meaning they come and they go. This is the difference. So the last two are constantly wavering, unlike the first two. Meaning when the angelic suggestion comes, an angel you can't see suggests something to you, that angel is suggesting something good. If you do not respond to it in the moment, the angel will invite you to another good. If you don't respond to that, it will invite you to another good. Now, so long as Shaitan and his minions have not arrived on the scene, you'll get different suggestions. If you're not answering them, another one will come. Chances are, Shaitan will arrive on the scene and it's the ma'araka, it's the battle. But the angel is simply trying to inspire you, wanting good for you. If you don't do one thing, he'll suggest something else. The angel will suggest another thing. Likewise, Shaitan and his minions, when they come whispering and suggesting things, their objective is not for you to do a specific sin necessarily, unless there's a long drawn out strategy in place. Most of the time, it's suggesting you to do something haram. And it doesn't matter what haram it is. Which means if you don't answer that suggestion in the beginning, another one will come. Do this haram. You don't listen? Okay, well, do this one. No, you didn't listen to that one? Okay, do this one. And this is what we mean by wavering, that it comes with multiple different suggestions at different times, contrary to the lordly and the nafsani suggestions. The lordly one comes with force, and the nafsani one comes and it doesn't leave because it's based on the cravings of the ego, the appetites. Because the nafs is like a baby. It's constantly crying and it's never relenting and giving up until you give it what it wants. He says, the lordly thoughts inspired by the exalted come only after serious effort in wholehearted worship. They bring coolness and have no specific type or time, and are always in accordance with the sacred law. So it's typically that the lordly suggestions will only come after a person has exerted some effort in obedience to Allah Ta'ala, some mujahada, some striving, because Allah says in the Quran in Surah Al-Ankabut, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who strive for our sake, we guide them to our paths. The meaning of this is by striving and struggling and working on yourself in obedience to Allah Ta'ala, Allah guides you and opens more doors of guidance. which means that these lordly suggestions usually come only after exerting effort in obedience. So, yes, there's certain causes that have to be in place, and usually these things come after obedience. However, it's not always the case. Sometimes the lordly suggestions can come in unexpected times and unexpected situations. The key to determining and discerning the lordly suggestion from others is to weigh it on the scales of the Sharia. Now, if an angelic suggestion comes, it will come with an encouragement to do good. So what is the lordly suggestion coming with? Is it coming with an encouragement to do good? And if so, what is the difference between the lordly suggestion and the angelic suggestion? The ulama mentioned that the lordly suggestion is different from the angelic suggestion in a couple of ways. Number one, the force with which it comes with a gripping force, unlike the angelic suggestion, which comes and goes depending on if we respond to it or not. Number two, they say that the lordly suggestion isn't necessarily coming with a thought that pertains to a good deed. Very often it is the case that the lordly Khwatir is coming with something that pertains to spiritual realities, or what they call Tawheed al-Khas, a kind of awareness of Allah's presence, a consciousness that wasn't there before, that in turn inspires you to a higher level of striving and turning to Him. So that's different from a specific good deed, to go give charity, or to pray, or to read half a juz of Quran before you head out for work. Those are suggestions that may come from the angels to do specific good deeds, whereas the lordly Khwatir may come with a force and with a meaning that if you implement it, it overhauls your entire perception of reality, or it reawakens your consciousness to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the chief difference. Therefore, if you look at the structure of Islam, you have usul and you have furu', you have roots and branches. The roots pertain to our beliefs, our core convictions, and furu' are the branches, meaning the things that you practice and do. So the lordly Khwatir will usually be pertaining to the usul, the roots, and the angelic Khwatir will usually pertain to the furu', to the branches, the things that you do. He says, like the dawn, they come and only increase in clarity and cannot be removed by a distraction, unlike angelic thoughts. Here's another distinction. The lordly Khwatir comes with clarity, and not just any clarity, it increases in clarity, because it is like the dawn. When you're looking at a sunrise, it doesn't get darker and darker, it gets brighter and brighter. Likewise, the lordly Khwatir will get brighter and brighter, clarity upon clarity, and it cannot be removed by a distraction, unlike the angelic thoughts, which can be removed by distractions. Because he says, these angelic thoughts can be opposed by shaitan, or the nafs, the commanding self, the self that commands to evil, and thus succeed in preventing its effects. Because the maliki, the angelic ones, can come and face opposition by the shaitani thoughts or the nafsani thoughts, to procrastinate, to do something else, so on and so forth. Or the shaitani thoughts may come and face opposition by the maliki, angelic thoughts. The common denominator between these two is that there's a battle. There's a back and forth. A person may get these suggestions from shaitan to do something bad, and then comes the angelic thought, so they latch onto the second one. Or they have an angelic thought, and as they move on, they get a shaitani thought, in which case they should ignore that and latch onto the first one. There's always this back and forth. He says the angelic thoughts come with sincere advice and encouragement to do good. And if you refuse, they suggest something else. For instance, he says, if you refuse the suggestion to pray, it inspires you to do some remembrance, some dhikr. And if you refuse that, it will suggest silence. It is strengthened by dhikr and it also brings coolness and expansion that accompany the inrush of the passing thought. The angels never command other than good. Indeed, that is why they were created. Because as we said, the shaitani thoughts may suggest something that is good, but it's a trap leading to evil. So it gets confusing here. So we need to have proper discernment between what is shaitani and what is malaki, angelic and satanic. Therefore, he breaks that down here, looking at the distinctions. And on this we conclude. He says that the angelic thoughts that come to the mind and heart come with nasiha. They come with a desire for you to do something good. The angelic thoughts suggest multiple things, all of which are good. And if you do not do them, it will encourage you to do something else. Number 3, with the angelic thoughts, if you engage in dhikr, the angelic Khwatir will gain strength. And there will come this coolness, this expansion of the heart when receiving these suggestions. And lastly, the angelic Khwatir will suggest something that is supported by clear-cut proofs within the Quran and the Sunnah. And these are the qualities of the passing thoughts and suggestions that come from the angels. And you contrast those with the passing thoughts and suggestions of shaitan and his minions. Those suggestions that come from shaitan and his minions are not supported by clear proofs. They're mixed up. They're ambiguous. It's not entirely clear. Is this the best thing in the moment? Or is it a good that may lead to some harm? It's not clear. Or it's ambiguous or mixed with intentions. It's not crystal clear. Number 2, with the shaitani suggestion, if it is acted upon, there will come a certain kind of heat and constriction. The person knows this was wrong. Number 3, the shaitani suggestions will weaken with dhikr. Contrast that with the angelic suggestions, which are strengthened with dhikr. And lastly, with the shaitanic suggestions, there is a sense of haste in the whispering or suggestion. And it's often followed with feelings of laziness after it is acted upon. If the person acts on the angelic suggestion, they will have expansion. They'll have a renewed vigor. If a person responds to the shaitanic suggestion, it will often accompany feelings of laziness and lethargy. And there's a sense of haste. Do this now. Now note, these are the angelic and the satanic thoughts. We still have to speak about the nafsi and rabbani suggestions that come to the heart. And we'll speak about that in our next session, insha'Allah ta'ala. Wallahu wa rasuluhu a'lam. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.